Welcome back to another episode of the Vet Worthwhile podcast. I am James Yost, partner and wealth advisor at Signature FD, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Travis York, owner of 3-1 Advisors. Travis, how are you?
I'm doing great today, James. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. That's great. We could probably make a whole episode just talking about different business models to practice veterinary medicine, which is definitely a fun topic. But one of the things we wanted to dive in with y'all, it's been on the top of everyone's mind is throughout COVID and throughout the increased spend on the veterinary side, the demand has been humongous. And it seems like veterinarians at this point are very fatigued, I would say. So I know both of y'all find this important, but like, what is something going forward, looking to the future? What are the things that hospital owners need to be focused on to achieve a balance between profitability, but also a sustainable practice by way of creating positive work-life balance for everybody involved? We start with Peter on that one.
Well, I think Donna just gave you an idea. I think that the doctor of control freak veterinary medicine has to go away, and we need to learn how to leverage our staff. By the way, it is interesting if you look at the fact that practices have been busier than ever, quote unquote, since the start of COVID on the revenue side, but the number of transactions did not grow nearly as much as the revenue did. So the inefficiency of the veterinary business model was exposed by the fact that we were making more money, but more stressed while doing so. Mm-hmm. So I do think one of the big things, if you want to start to decrease global stress, is start to share the responsibilities within the practice so that everybody is involved with the delivery of care. The technicians, client service team. I mean, I can build business models that don't even need a receptionist because of what we have access to from a technology standpoint. But I do think that we need to, by also choosing the clients that we want to take care of. Again, I can tell you times in practice where I didn't say no because I didn't know how busy tomorrow was going to be. So we constantly said yes to make sure we could pay the bills long term today. And we probably could have put something off until tomorrow. So we've got to start to rethink the way we do things. And I think the more we can leverage our staff, whether it's learning how to use RVTs and getting them to stay within the profession as a career and not just a job. I think part of the stress comes from the high turnover that we have in the veterinary profession and the fact that we bring people on and we don't train with the idea of retain. We don't train and we don't retain. And so I think we've got to stop, slow down, figure out what we want to have as a final outcome and start building the business models to that end. And that has to be a model that utilizes everybody, empowers everybody, and gives people a chance to make decisions at the grassroots level. So everything doesn't get dumped on the doctor, everything doesn't get dumped on the manager or the head technician. We don't empower our staff to make decisions for the best interest of the client, the patient, or the practice. We basically put up so many barriers in terms of yes, no, gray, black, white, et cetera. We've just got to think differently and create team-based healthcare that is not so stressful by trying to be everything to everybody. And I know I just vomited all over you guys, but I think Donna had a lot of simple solutions that we could integrate, telehealth being one when integrated appropriately. And some of these other uses of mid-level practitioners can decrease the stress level. Bottom line, why were we so stressed when theoretically we were seeing about the same number of transactions there as we were seeing pre-COVID? And a lot of it has to do with inefficiencies. A lot of it has to do with clients being obnoxious and staff being obnoxious back to clients. So I think, honestly, I think there's a lot of things that came out of COVID that were good. And I think there's a lot of things that came out of COVID that need to be flushed down the toilet and put behind us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, an interesting thought. And could really impact things, significantly if we could spread the burden across and spread the decisions, right? It ultimately comes down to an organization where there's one person making every decision. Of course, that gets stressful. If that person has to make 400 decisions, if that person has to make 10 decisions, and then, each person underneath that person only has to make 30 decisions, we've got a whole lot better model out there.
Well, let me add to that, Travis, in the sense that since the leader tends to set the tone for everybody else, when you have a highly stressed owner and manager, it stresses everybody else out as well. So we've got to share the stress. It can't just be one pillar that's holding up the entire business, because that pillar is getting weaker and weaker, and they then feed back all their stress on everybody else.
Absolutely. So, Peter, can we kind of take this and I'm going to dive back to your Marriott, just because I love this Marriott service business thought and notion. Do you think one of the stressors is that the profession has been set up to one-stop shop meets every need? And so then that just creates more decisions that have to be made, where, I've been around a business model where somebody had 5 things that they treated, and it was incredibly successful because the team knew, hey, these are the 5 things that we could do. And if it wasn't part of what they could handle, the client was redirected to somebody who could handle it. How do you see that playing out in the Marriott, right? It's very easy right now. If you work at a Marriott and somebody calls and they want, a mint on their pillow and a turn down, and they call a Hampton Inn, the Hampton Inn says, no, we don't do that. How do we take that lesson in hotel and apply it to veterinary medicine, Peter?
I was hoping you were to throw that one at Donna. So, Travis, your stays at the Econo Lodge were probably paid by the hour, not by the night. But that's a different discussion. So here's how you do it. No
mints on the pillow.
Here's how you do it. I hated surgery. What if I built a practice without a surgery suite? And I referred to a colleague in the neighborhood that just did surgery. How much overhead cost would I save by not having a surgery suite? That might make it easier for me to charge less for well care visits. Because think about it. The economists can help me out on this. Think about it. We pay 100% for the physical plants that we are only using about 20% of at any point in time. Your boarding is busy at the holidays. But what about the rest of the year? Your surgery suite, if you're a single doctor practice, your surgery suite generates no income when you're in an exam room, and your exam rooms generate no income when you're in surgery. So why can't we build wellness-only clinics? And maybe you own a wellness-only clinic and a sickness clinic, and you rotate your doctors through so nobody gets bored. But your overhead, you can net 50% in a clinic that just takes care of well care. So maybe you charge less, but you make more. I mean, if you had a $500,000 practice that generated $250,000 in EBITDA because you don't have all of the other costs, what do you think of that from a business model? I mean, you've got 400 square feet of couches and carpeting, and all you do is vaccinations and microchips, deworming, and play with puppies all day.
Isn't this already happening in veterinary medicine, Peter? From your perspective, isn't this why some of the corporate entities are doing so well? Because they have segmented the industry. I mean, don't some of the corporations have multiple levels of
they do. Yeah, they do. But why can't private practices do it as well? I mean, that if it's working for the corporates, there are some things we want to model. There are some things we don't. So yeah, I mean, it's not unique. It's just doing it. It's getting out of the James
some
Perry.
Are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some private practices in certain communities are doing it. But I think the one thing that we're missing on here is to look at the personality of the veterinary students that are coming through the program. They tend to be type A, very successful. They're very bright, and they have a lot of energy. And some of them, not all, have fallen into the perfectionist model. And so if we don't help them in veterinary school understand some of these traits, then they bring them into practice and try to be the I am the solution to all your animal health issues type of person. So I think we can help that in veterinary school, and then give them these ideas of these different models and and infuse in them Peter's can-do attitude of innovation and entrepreneurship.
So
And that will slowly start to change the profession.
So Donna, can I jump in? Because you talked about the schools, and it dovetails into one of the things that I really I focus on a lot, which is I think about, being in my dad's practice 25, 30 years ago. Outside of an x-ray machine, there was no in-house diagnostic equipment available. Today, many of the students who graduate wouldn't even contemplate considering working at a hospital that didn't have an in-house lab, an x-ray machine, an ultrasound machine, a cold laser therapy, a laser endoscopy. I mean, I could probably, we could get on a distribution rep who could probably list, tons of equipment that is essential to make your hospital operate. So how do we go forward and balance those two things, right? Because some of that is what, to Peter's point, remove a surgery suite and think about how much savings you get. How do we balance that in schools so, veterinarians of the future are able to rely on some of the old skills that allow diagnosis to happen?
Yeah, it's a really great question, a really good concept to think about. I think part of the challenge is what you're talking about is balancing the desire of academic institutions to have a teaching hospital, which is typically a tertiary education unit. And so they are learning with all the latest and greatest tools and from boarded veterinarians. But the reason that can be important is because it helps teach them the steps to critical thinking and how to work through those complex cases, which that same thinking process then applies to preventative wellness, less urgent, less deep dive cases. On the other hand, that needs to be balanced with what our distributive model academic institutions do so well, right? Like Western and LMU, they do a great job of sending their students out into practices that are great practices, but maybe don't have all those bells and whistles. And the students get to practice some of the other skills without everything they have with them. So I think even the academic institutions with big tertiary care hospitals are increasing the opportunities for students to go out in externships, more like the distributive model, which gives them a little bit of a balance. I don't think there's a right or the wrong way in that, but it absolutely needs to be balanced. I don't believe that a student should never be in a tertiary opportunity so that they learn how to manage those real complex cases. My desire would be them to not have to refer them if they get comfortable managing them themselves. They don't have to refer some of those cases. And I think the balance is the key.
Balance. So Peter, can a veterinary hospital exist without an in-house lab, a cold laser therapy, and a endoscopy machine?
Yes. And it can exist without an x-ray unit, and it can exist without any of these things because we did it 30 years ago, and we had some very successful veterinarians doing it then. What we've been boggled and brainwashed by bright, shiny objects. Now, I love all the industry players that are out there and giving us the resources that we have, but I do think that we have to slow it down and take a look for just a minute about, have we lost the one skill that differentiates healthcare from everything else, and that's the history and physical examination. What's happened is we've used technology as a history and physical examination, but really our skill set starts with the basic physical exam and examination, and everything should be secondary to that. And to do that well, you need both IQ and EQ. And so I'm going to take a step back and suggest that veterinary students who we do adversely choose for high intellect, high IQ, we need to start to look at how we can balance that IQ and EQ so the perfectionism that we've created in this profession isn't so pervasive. And so people will look at other options. Now, one of the things, and I'm sure Donna has seen this as well, is more and more students are looking at shelter medicine and other ways of giving back. Mm-hmm. I think every veterinary student should have to run and work a number of free clinics in communities that are underserved so they can see what primary care looks like and see what the needs are. I think by doing so and educating about spectrum of care, I mean, maybe some of the residents need to ask the students, okay, what if the client can't afford it? What is option number 2? What if they can't even afford that? What is option number 3? Because I think and as a consultant, I was guilty of this in the past. We always went with what was called the gold standard, but I will call the Tesla standard now. And we need to think about the Kia standard as well. But the other thing about many of the veterinary schools is they really don't have a primary care facility to be able to deliver that. I can't think of how many wellness exams I did when I was in veterinary school, which is why I think many of the veterinary schools are setting up remote hospitals in, if it's Michigan State, it might be in Detroit. If it's in Illinois, it might be in Chicago. If it's at Cornell, it might be in New York City, because I think we have to expose students to all levels of care. Human healthcare almost mandates it in the students having to do the clinics, the free clinics that are associated with human hospitals. And I think we need to start doing that as well.
Peter, can I push back a little for a second and ask you something? You started off by saying, Travis asked the question is, can this practice survive without these various tools? And my question to would be, yes, financially, perhaps I would agree with you in certain areas, but can they survive when the clientele is demanding some of that equipment and thinking less of a practice that doesn't have it?
Well, that's because they're looking at what has existed in the past. But if we start to make this more of a model for the future, ease of access, don't have to wait 2 weeks to get in, get your pet vaccinated. I mean, listen, some of my best clients waited online at pet stores to get their pets vaccinated because they couldn't get in to see me or the cost was higher. There's an interesting survey that showed the number one user of low-cost spay and neuter facilities are upper middle class pet owners. So I think that there is a need. I think that there is a demand. And I think what we have failed to do is given the choice. So if you also want to look at a lifestyle that is different than when you and I graduated, how about if this was a lifestyle type practice that basically veterinarians could work from 8 to 12 in the morning or from 1 to 6 in the afternoon? It again, because none of it is emergency, it's really just basic care. I think it's there. And I think in human healthcare, we have seen the growth of these minute clinics, these walk-in clinics. I think I'm not suggesting that we follow the model of human healthcare completely, but I just think that if we start to re-educate the consumers about what their options are, really up until whenever, they only had one choice. Now they have choices. And I will tell you the consumers want choices. They want very simple, basic choices that say, here's where you go and get your vaccinations, your flea and tick and heartworm control. And if your pet is sick, we work with this other facility as well that we can refer you to. I think we have to start to give people choices because I think it's exhausting to try to be everything to everybody.
That was great. So we've talked, as we keep focusing on the future, we've talked a little bit about the business models that y'all are thinking about and that are out there. We talked about some different diagnostic tools and things of that nature. Let's get into hospital ownership. So we've obviously seen a tremendous consolidation of hospital ownership with the corporates over the last, really, it's accelerated rampantly over the last decade. But a few questions, and we'll start with Donna. One is there any cyclicality to that, or is that going to continue to happen and be a pattern of the future? And then two, as the futurist, are there any kind of innovative ideas with respect to hospital ownership that you and your colleagues are looking at?
Well, I think I don't know that it's cyclical. All right. So I don't see an indication of again, looking at the future trends and weak signals that we see out there, we see a continued stratification of the economics in the population. And when that stratification gets worse, it's going to push the veterinary profession, I assume, into more segmentation so that it can reflect the different economic realities. And so with that is going to come, as Peter had said, the innovative ideas are going to come from individual owners and how they can meet those needs. Or They're going to come from people from outside the profession, which is where big change typically comes from, right? So it'll come from people outside the profession that are trying to meet a societal need. So different ownership models, maybe not the big corporations, but other ownership models that are set up to meet a specific need. And the example I give is the public had been screaming at the veterinary profession to do something about the overpopulation and the of pets years ago. And the veterinary profession kept saying, well, we can't make our spays and neuters cheaper. We can't make our spays and neuters cheaper. And they said, fine, we'll start a nonprofit, and spays and neuter clinics are doing it a lot less expensive and doing quite a good job, most of them, right? So the public will often come up with solutions if the veterinary profession doesn't. And so that's the biggest change in ownership that we might see. And it's a good thing to keep our eye on, is what is the public asking us to do that the profession is not honoring, looking at ways to do it.
Peter, what about you? Same question.
Well, I think what we're going to see is a little bit of Pac-Man of the corporations. I think the big guys are going to eat the middle guys, who are going to eat the little guys. And I think you guys have probably seen some of this more recently, but from what I'm hearing, purchasing by corporations has almost hit zero compared to what it was earlier in the year. And money is drying up, even so that some of these mid and low-level consolidators that are looking to recap are waiting to see how things are going. I do think that there was a lot of money spent in 2001, 2000, in early 2022 on buying at huge multiples practices, which was outstanding for the sellers, and put a lot of money in the profit and loss statements, the balance sheets for these consolidators. But what I'm worried about is what's going to happen if the economy, which is murky at best, unstable, leads to a slowdown. And we're seeing this if you look at the national surveys. Revenue is down to about 3% above last year. Transactions are down to below 4%, a loss of 4%. What's going to happen to the consolidators that made these huge investments that aren't getting the ROI because business is slowed down? And then now they're paying these huge salaries because they were losing doctors and they had to refill positions. And so they had signing bonuses and increased salaries. I think we're in a very fragile point in this profession over the next 6 months to a year, maybe 2 years, to see where this is all going to head out. But if I base things on what I've seen in the UK, Australia, and Europe to a degree, I think that some of the smaller consolidators are going to get absorbed into the mid-level consolidators. And I think this 60, 70 number of consolidators will probably be down to 20 or 25 in the next couple of years, because the outcomes are very tenuous at the moment. And, what happens if we have a downturn like we had in 2008 to 2012, thereabouts, where we didn't lose a lot of hospitals from bankruptcy standpoint, but we had a lot of doctors that were underemployed or even unemployed, and that with all of these high salaries that are out there and signing bonuses and everything else, I'm not necessarily a cynic, I'm not necessarily a skeptic, and I'm definitely not a realist, and I'm the furthest I could be from an economist, but I am just a bit uncomfortable about how quickly and rapidly things changed over the last 2 years without a very strong foundation. So bottom line is, I think, again, there's a place for the well-managed, well-thought-through consolidators, and I think the others are going to get disrupted in their own way.
I think that's super interesting, Peter. And obviously, just in, kind of wrapping things up and bringing us all back together, you said something that, we're at a fragile point. So, I think both of you are still very optimistic. So I doubt that, fragile point is going to lead to either one of you giving us the conclusion that, veterinary medicine is going to be in a bad place. But we're obviously dealing with a lot. There's been a rapid consolidation. I think unless we've been under a rock, we all know that there's right now a shortage of veterinarians. Peter, to your point, you and I sat in a room not 10 years ago and talked about there being too many veterinarians. So, what do you guys predict? What is the future of veterinary medicine going to look like for the professionals that work in it? And then for the families that rely on those services to take care of their family members? Donna, I'll let you start since Peter had to start the last one and you got to judge Peter. We'll let you start, and then Peter could judge your conclusions as a futurist on what we're going to be looking at in the future.
Great. Well, I really, again, not predictive in any way, but I do think we're going to see a continued segmentation of the services offered. I hope that the mid-level practitioner model will show success to decrease the workload of the veterinarian and improve the efficiency within our practices. I think that's going to be really important. And I do think that the incoming generations of veterinarians are really holding firm to a strong work-life balance, whatever that means to them. They define what that means, and then they hold to it. So I'm very encouraged by those big 3 points.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I've been taking notes on my big 3 points, and you kind of hit on them, Donna. So, Peter, feel free to pass judgment or share your big 3 points.
Come on, Peter, disagree with me. Let's go.
Donna, it may sound strange, but I don't disagree with you, except in the one thing is that I don't really think we need to create another cost of education to create mid-level practitioners, because until we learn how to use the team we already have and learn to leverage our technicians, I think just giving more titles and more education isn't the answer first. I think we need to learn how to deal with that. Bottom line, I'm very optimistic about where this profession is headed as long as we put clients and patients first. And we have focused really in a lot of the conversation on the urban areas, the suburban areas. The rural areas are a whole new world and a whole different world from a conversational standpoint, because they are veterinary deserts. It's really hard at times to get veterinarians to some of these underserved areas that may be in the middle of Los Angeles or the middle of Palm Springs. Well, not Palm Springs, but Death Valley. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see the change as we see more and more veterinary schools and changing of consolidators. We've got so much money being invested in the veterinary profession by Walmart, by Mars, by outsiders. But what I really want to continue to see is we need to take the colleges, the state boards, the associations, the technicians, and come together as a profession and work to find solutions for the future that don't look backwards, but look forwards and look at other industries that are service industries with a healthcare lean, and figure out what we can do to help start to steer the direction of the profession, which is glacial in its change, but speed that boat up. Because I don't think we can wait for change. I think we have to start to control the changes we have going forward. And the only way to do that is if everybody comes together and works together towards a common goal. The silos that we currently have existing make change even slower. But if we can bring the colleges and the state boards and the associations and the technicians all together, I think we can start to visualize what the future will look like. And multi-generations within those, I think it would be a lot of fun to be in a room where people are just sitting there looking at the future instead of looking at the past. And our futurist Donna can facilitate that conversation.
Donna, that sounds like a punt from Peter to me. I think earlier in our little discussion, Peter said he sat in front of Bob Anton and pitched himself for a job. That to me sounded like a job pitch for Peter with his past experience as an executive director to take on the role as the president of an organization that builds the future of veterinary medicine. So I
love it.
We're going to push this out, Peter, and just let it be a job pitch for you.
Well, it sounds great, but even though I'm a veterinarian, I also have an MBA. So if you want to start to talk to me about it, let's start with the salary first.
well, perfect. The good news is, on this one, I just get to say thank you to you guys for taking the time to share your thoughts, spend a little bit of time with us. And hopefully, if nothing else, just really start that conversation. Would be happy to share Peter's personal cell phone if anybody wants to hire him and have that conversation about the salary that it would take for him to lead the change in veterinary medicine. But, that kind of tees up, our favorite question here when you get to the end is one of my friends has a sign in their bathroom that says, everybody wants to change the world, a la Peter, but no one wants to change the toilet paper. First question to both of you. Have you ever tried to sneak out of the bathroom with an empty toilet paper roll and not change it?
Never.
All
Cardinal
the time.
sin.
All the time. All the time.
Well, since you're both privy to, trying to change the world, what is the one piece of advice in 30 seconds from each of you to a veterinarian who does want to change the world? We'll let Peter start it because Donna, you started last time.
Yeah.
One piece of advice for the veterinarian who wants to change the veterinary business world is don't read about veterinary business. Read about other successful businesses that are out there, from GE to IBM to Tesla to Apple. Read about other industries that have become successful. I think one of the problems with the veterinary profession is we model against each other, which kind of goes into the definition of insanity. So if you want to learn how to be successful, read about how other people became successful.
Great advice. Donna, how can you top that?
I will not top it. Peter's got great advice on that. I agree with every word he just said. The one thing I will say from a future standpoint is when you're driving in a car, you're looking forward at the future, and that's important. But you wouldn't dare drive a car with never looking in the rearview mirror or the side view mirrors. And that's where a lot of change is happening. We need to pay attention to where change is in the back and where it can be sneaking up on us and where a thing can hit us from the side. That's the only way to be prepared for the future, is looking at all around you, because the biggest changes come from outside the industry, right? COVID changed, the automobile changed, society's desire for human-animal bond change. What is climate change going to do? What is the economic environment of certain cultures going to do? That's where big change is often happening. And that's where us as a profession, we need to be looking and paying attention to that change.
Wow, that was great. Thanks again, y'all, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Is there anything that either of y'all want to plug? If you want to send somebody to your website or to your social media, or Peter, maybe to your book, is there anything, how can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you guys?
Just reach out to Travis. He has all my contact information.
That's only if you want to hire Peter to commission the change in veterinary medicine.
Donna, what about you?
We'll hire. I think going through Travis is a great idea. I think that's the most effective way to get a hold of us. I'm at Michigan State University the majority of my time. We're looking to start a foundation for the future of veterinary medicine. It's more like a think tank. So if you've got a couple $100,000 and you want to put toward a nonprofit think tank for veterinary medicine, be sure and get a hold of Travis, and he'll funnel it our way.
I love it. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks again, y'all. This has been the Vet Worthwhile podcast. My name is James Yost, joined always by my co-host, Travis York. You can find us at signaturefd.com. Reach out with a contact us. Thanks again for tuning in to the Vet Worthwhile podcast. You can find us online at signaturefd.com/signatureveterinary. And then our ask would be, if you found this episode valuable, just think of one friend or colleague that you think would enjoy the content, and just please share. So thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Travis York is the owner of 3-in-1 Vet Advisors and a partner of Signature FD. 3-in-1 Vet Advisors is a veterinary consulting and strategic planning firm of which Signature FD has no involvement or ownership. James Yost is a partner and wealth advisor at Signature FD. Signature FD is an investment advisor registered with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. 3-in-1 Vet Advisors and Signature FD are not affiliated. Mr. York provides all non-investment advisory services through 3-in-1 Vet Advisors. The opinions of the guests and the contents of this podcast are intended to be educational only and should not be relied upon as investment, tax, business, or planning advice. You should consult with a professional advisor prior to taking any course of action that may impact you or your business.